story time. Just driving home from the UP at Whitetail Warriors Deer Camp for a couple days. Had fun there, but anyway, I'm going to tell you a story that's about as cool gets. 20-ish years ago, we were hunting. Well, it wasn't hunting yet. We were scouting in October. It was Iron County, middle of nowhere, Iron County, Wisconsin. And I was driving down this old logging trail and with my pickup. And this guy with a four-wheeler was coming down the other direction towards me. Older gentleman stopped, started shooting debris with him. And I noticed he had like the old Vietnam era jacket on with, you know, an insignia like the air cav patch on it. So I got talking about that because I'm a big war buff, and he was telling me about his service and how he was in the Ia Drang Valley in like 1965, and I, at the time, I had no idea, you know, what he was really talking about as far as the exact battle and whatnot. Later on, years later, when We Were Soldiers came out, that's the battle he was talking about. He was in the air cav unit that got dropped into that LZ X-ray, I think it was called, and fought that battle with his commanding officer, was Hal Moore. Whatever, we were talking about that, of course, and then deer hunting and whatever. Fast forward to Friday after Thanksgiving, and when there's snow on the ground, we used to do is I would find a big buck track. Now I do that and I go tracking it just myself and me and my son. It's great, but we'd find a big buck track, fresh one, and I would get on it, and then the guys would just circle the blocks and whatever, and try to cut this deer off. Call it dogging, or back then it was belling, because none of us had, we weren't carrying GPSs and radios and cell phones and whatever. It just, nobody was. It was just compasses, and you just went in the woods. So to keep track of the guy, me, that was on the track of the deer, I'd hang a cowbell around my neck, and that originated from a buddy of ours that hunts, older gentlemen, that when they were kids, their dad would do that to them, so they knew where the kids were and they wouldn't get lost. They put the kids on the track. So I had a cowbell on, especially when it's really quiet. You can hear that ding, ding so far off in a distance, and it always worked really well. Not to mention, you're following a deer up in the middle of nowhere that has very little experience with a human to begin with, and all of a sudden this ding, ding, ding is following them. They're so curious. We chased a lot of bucks that way and killed some good ones. I mean, it's fun. So anyway, I found this big buck track in the morning. I got on the track, and I told one of the guys to go way around this other road and down by the river and just stand at this spot, because it's a funnel and this deer is probably going to head that direction. So I kicked this buck out of this little patch of hemlock in the middle of the hardwoods and see it run off and didn't get a shot at it, and it was a stud. I'm like, man, we're on this deer, it's right in front of us now. So I get over a couple of hardwood ridges, and I could see way down the creek edge to where one of our buddies was supposed to be. Well, he was sitting there. I know he wasn't sitting, he was standing. I could see way off in the distance this orange jacket moving around. And I'm like, man, if you'd have just sat still, you'd have killed this buck, right? That's what I was thinking. So I'm walking, following the track, and it stopped. And I couldn't find it for just a couple seconds. I'm like, that deer turned around, backtracked, because he saw our buddy along the creek moving around. So I turned around and just kept watching towards the creek bottom, because I knew it was going to jump off, because obviously it didn't come running back at me, so it went off. And it wasn't going to go on the open hardwoods. It was going towards the creek bottom. And sure as heck, you could see a huge jump. It jumped off to kind of like break the scent trail it was leaving. Just instincts, survival. So I get back on the track, and I could hear this deer right in front of me busting ice in a creek and in those tag haulers. I'm like, man, this deer's right here. And just as I was coming out of the tag haulers, getting to the edge of some mixed hemlocks and hardwoods, I hear a boom. I'm like, yeah, awesome. And I'm thinking, well, that's where one of our buddies, Fuzzy, he went down that way. That's where he was sitting at. I popped over this little ridge, and it's not Fuzzy, and there's this gentleman standing there over this deer, big 9-pointer, 21-inch inside spread, just a stud of a buck. And he's standing with a pistol, and he's just, you could see it's just his heart sink, because he was thinking I was trailing this deer and it was wounded, and it was probably going to be a battle, not a battle, but a discussion on whose deer it was or whatever. First thing I did is I stuck my hand out and shake his hand and said, nice buck, and I'm patting him on the back. All of a sudden I noticed it's that freaking Vietnam vet that I had met back in October. So we got to talking, and the rest of the guys finally got in, came into the kill. We're going to help this guy get this deer out. Older gentleman, So I'm sitting there talking to this guy, and he's like, yeah, I was sitting in my blind, walked out of the blind. He said, I'm having a cigarette, and all of a sudden, just over this hill, like 10 yards away, this big buck pops over. He said, I pulled my pistol out, boom, shot it. That's great. I was so happy for the guy. And he proceeded to tell us that he hadn't seen a buck in 7 years sitting in this spot. I'm like, well, this was just made to happen for him, It was cool as heck. So we helped him getting out, whatever, but that was so neat. Just the way that meeting that guy earlier and then finding out later on the battle he was in and the shit he went through. Again, we were so happy for him at the time, but after the fact, it was like, dang, that's great. Then he was, while we were talking to him, he was, his buddy that he met in the service that they fought together and both survived. His buddy says, hey, why don't you come back to central Wisconsin where I live? And because the guy really didn't have no family, I guess, or whatever. So he's like, yeah, why not? So he came back and they ended up marrying his war buddy's sister, and they had a caboose for their deer camp. It was just neat as heck. I mean, these old guys had it going on. But yeah, that was a cool story. I thought so anyway, and I'm almost home now, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.